Welcome, everyone, to the next in the series of our ESPC campaign workshops. Thanks for registering in advance and for joining us this afternoon. Today, the topic that we'll be covering is reviewing the investment grade audit and project proposals, really next in sort of the sequence of implementing an ESPC project. My name is Deb Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Energy Services Coalition, and we are providing support to the Department of Energy for their ESPC campaign. This is one of the tools we have to help you all, and we hope that these have been beneficial and look forward to supporting you ongoing. So with that, Chris, you want to start move the next slide. So today, this is a meeting format, not a webinar, which means that everyone has access to microphone and camera. So if you have questions during the webinar or during the workshop rather, you can drop those in the chat box. You can raise your hand. We will stop and answer those. We do have a couple of structured breaks through the presentation to stop and respond to questions that have come up to that point. The workshop is going to be recorded, and we do want folks to really ask good questions and not hold anything back. So the recording is not going to be shared or distributed widely like on a website, only to campaign partners that request it. So feel free to ask questions. This is not going to be shared with contractors or other people like that. So, but it is going to be recorded as a resource for you going forward. The slides also, there's a lot of content, as you will see. Our trainer today, our presenter, Chris Halpin, will be covering these mostly in kind of a summary and a highlight fashion, but there's a lot of great content that will be provided to you later as well. So just listen to what Chris has to say and think of questions, and all of this information will be provided to you later in a more detailed format. Next check. Again, Deb Taylor, I'm the ED of the Energy Services Coalition, and our presenter today and trainer who you've seen before, if you have attended one of these, is Chris Halpin. Chris has decades of experience as in the ESPC sector, all sides of the transactions, different roles, owner's rep, et cetera. And we're going to turn it over to Chris in just a minute. And if you'd like, just drop in the chat maybe who you are. I'm going to have a poll that I'm going to pull up in a second. I know that looking at the names here that some of you have joined us before. So if you've done that, there's no need to fill in all the information that you filled out before. But if you're new and you haven't joined us for one of the workshops before, please do fill in that polling information, and we'll keep that in the background. So next slide, Chris. So the Energy Services Coalition, if you're not familiar with us, we're a national nonprofit, public-private sector. Our objective really is to raise awareness of energy savings performance contracting and to support implementation of projects using ESPC. So we're not an advocacy or a lobbying organization. We exist to help educate and kind of lift the level of education for all parties to the transactions and provide support across the states. Next. And Chris, let me turn it over to you here, let you kind of go through the workshop agenda. And while you're doing that, I will pull up the first poll. And again, folks that have not provided information in the past, feel free to add that now while Chris is working through the workshop agenda outline. Chris?
All righty. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate the intro. And thank you all for joining today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your precious schedules. We know this is always busy for people that are involved in this part of the energy world, but it's particularly busy now, right, with all the money that's coming out from the federal government and deadlines and this whole election thing, right? Everyone's busy, so we appreciate the time you're taking. What I'm hoping to do today is, in this sort of workshop format, is get into a little more detail about certain things we've covered, especially in the recent training that we did back at the end of September, but not in a huge amount of detail, right? It's enough to kind of give you some high-level ideas about how to really constructively work through an IGA with your ESCO, right? The most important thing out of all of this for me is that this is a great opportunity using performance contracting to get stuff done in your buildings and your systems and facilities, streetlights, parks, pools, whatever it might be. and use this tool to really help you make great accomplishments, right? Whether it's saving money, creating jobs, decarbonization, electrification, whatever that might be. So typically, you know, when I was doing this full time as an owner's rep, I would spend days reviewing IGAs, right? 3-4 days. And when I had staff, I would parse it out to my different engineers, and they would spend, you know, half a day to a day each. So we won't be doing that today, right? We've got an hour-ish to do this. So as things come up, please keep in mind I'm available through office hours, which will have a sign-up thing at the end. There's always more to this, right? There's always more to learn and more to go through and ask questions and get your questions answered so that you become more comfortable proceeding down the path of doing a performance contract, or even, you know, fixing one that you've had problems with, and so on and so forth. So anyway,
Yeah,
with that being said,
another boring ass meeting of
If folks could
stuff I know a lot
could
of.
mute their lines, Rod, that'd be.
hey, Rod.
Here we go.
Anyway,
Thank you.
So great. Hey, thanks. So we're going to go through this process, sort of a 6-step process, reviewing the IGA, then some summary of the best practices, some resources, questions, and discussions. And we're going to stop intermittently here to be able to take questions, because we really want to be more interactive, you know, really sort of a workshop format while still trying to cover the material. Here. Okay, so we've got some acronyms here. I'm not going to go through these, but you're going to see these getting used throughout presentation. And again, most of them are pretty commonplace. I didn't include every single one, but these are the ones that get used the most. So the setup really is setting expectations, responsibilities, and schedule. So where are we in the process, right? And you've seen any of my presentations before. We've been talking about this since the first one back in June. You know, the Department of Energy basically breaks down performance contracting into 5 different phases, right? Planning, procurement, investment grade audit, the development process, design, construction, commissioning, and that performance period. We're right now in phase 3, IGA, right? Basically, you've been working with your ESCO to get an IGA done, and we're trying to help you get it reviewed and approved so you can move on and actually get these projects built. And this was in my last presentation. We fine-tuned it a little bit, but it's basically something that I really started doing years ago, because I did this for the federal government for a long time, and we'd have an ESCO come in, do 1 or 2 workshops, and then bang, a 6-inch binder would land at everybody's desks, and the owner didn't have as much input as they would have liked into developing an IGA. So we started doing this as a best practice with the company I had for a long time. And we would break it down between 30, 60, 90, and 100% IGAs. Sort of like if you probably do regular design bid builds for new buildings or renovations, and you have your AE team do sort of programming, then schematic drawings, then design development drawings, and then construction drawings, right? And it gives you a chance to basically make changes as you go along and give the contractor and the designer your ideas and input and so on. So it's the same thing with investment grade audit, right? And this basically starts out as sort of a high level document, typically a 30 to 50 slide PowerPoint deck. Doesn't always have to be like a report, but goes through some of the base stuff, baseline analysis, equipment, facility descriptions, and so on, to see sort of what do we have in our hands. And you've hired this ESCO. Almost all of them are highly qualified. You work with them closely to come up with some of these first high level ideas, and they present them to you, and sort of it's your first chance to have some input on what's going to happen with the project. Then they go off, spend another usually month or 2 putting together a 60% scoping document where they're looking at what measures they think are going to make sense for you, start getting some ballpark costs, ballpark savings, draft M&V plans, how would we really measure all this? And this document starts to become larger, right? And that's a mixture of sort of Word, Excel, and sometimes some energy modeling software, either in a sort of a proprietary software platform, or sometimes they're public. And then most of them these days are Excel, because Excel has become pretty sophisticated. Then you move on to the draft final IGA report, and this has got a lot of information, right? From executive summary with detailed descriptions, and we'll go through all of this in a few minutes. But this is a big document. This is hundreds of pages. I've reviewed these, and there were like 1,200 pages, right? But that's when you have a team, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So everyone does a piece. And then the final report is basically reviewing to see if all the questions you had on the previous reports had been answered, right? And this becomes sort of the document that's either going to get incorporated completely into your agreement with the ESCO, or it's going to get segmented out into different schedules. We'll talk about that. So what do one of these really look like, right? And this is one I took from an actual live project. It was completed, let's see, IGA was completed in 21. It got built over the next year or two, and it's currently a finished project up in the Northeast, a $14 million project. And I like this one because it's very comprehensive. You can see this list of buildings. It's everything from all the town buildings to all the school buildings, right? Kind of a couple of dozen buildings were included. And it's got everything from lighting and rich commissioning to boiler replacements, cogeneration, solar. It's really got a lot in it. And this is very typical of most IGA tables of contents. It's got all the initial stuff, then how we put all the technical stuff together, and then all the backup data, all the appendices that go in the back of the report. And that's what takes up most of the room typically. So now it's time to start reviewing this, right? And like I said, there's going to be multiple reviews going on, this 30, 60, 90, 100. It typically, a week or two to 3 weeks. The 90% IGA review typically takes the longest. You want to basically segment out the folks on your team. And again, we have all kinds of different folks on this call. Everyone I saw from like sustainability coordinators and energy managers and analysts up through managers, project managers, directors of this and that. So you have people at all different levels. And the way I set this up, and I couldn't find anything online that showed this anywhere, so I made this chart over the past week or so that basically shows for the technical components, the financial components, and the contractual components by person or by title, who should be reviewing what, right? And we're not going to go through this in detail, but you can tell that most of the technical stuff is reviewed by your owner's rep, right? And hopefully you've hired an owner's rep. We talked about that in every single one of these that I've done. They can really help. And when I was working for ESCO in the 90s, they weren't around, and it made it very difficult to get projects done. So that way you had this outside independent resource reviewing basically every word of the document and every cell formula and the savings calcs. Your leadership folks, right, your directors of DPW, your CFO, and that sort of thing, they should only be reviewing mainly the contractual financial stuff. Some a little bit, you'll see I have a few boxes checked to make sure they're looking at like executive summary and so on. The facilities and O&M, they're your soldiers in the trenches on this, right? They're going to be doing most of the review, especially the technical parts. And again, that's probably the single most important part of this. And if you've seen any of my presentations before, I come from a family of laborers and tradesmen, right? All, union, non-union, and those folks that make those buildings work are your ally in making this whole project successful. So bring them in early, have them be part of the kickoff meetings, review things all the way through, right? And then financial, that's in-house financial, outside financial advisors if you have one, and contractual, reviewing everything that has to do with the contract and terms and conditions with your in-house legal folks and outside counsel. We find it's really good to find outside counsel that have experience with performance contracts. We're not going to get into the agreement in this workshop. We'll do another one for that, but that's absolutely key. And the review is really about trying to make sure things make sense. It's common sense. Did they portray your buildings and how they work accurately? Do the savings calculations seem reasonable? There's some documents you can use here. I have this comment response resolution document that we took from our Department of Energy work and brought it to sort of every state and local school district I worked with around the country. So that's a live link. It goes to go to page 135 when you get there. It's a great resource from the Department of Energy. You can see that here. It's a project development resource guide. Same thing here. The Performance Contracting National Resource Center is something Laura Carpenter's group, the SCEP group, put together. That's put together a lot of good documents, as well as this 8-module training certificate series. Is really meant for training owners reps, but it's great for folks like you who are interested in doing this kind of a project, right? And this goes in depth, right? I was lucky enough to be able to help put this together. It's probably 15 hours of training. and you get CEUs for it. So next. So as you're reviewing this, right, there's this comment response resolution document we started working probably 15 years ago. And I've just used a few examples here, right? You take the date it gets done, the section or comment number rather, the discipline, the person, and this is an actual project I'm working on right now, a couple of questions, the ESCO's response to it, any follow-up comments you want to put in there, and then the final disposition. So that way you have a record that takes you from the beginning through the end of the whole development process. And it's great to use this on a collaborative software platform like, you know, Google Drive, Dropbox, Teams, something like that. And for each phase of this, when you get through 30, 60, 90, 100, create another tab for each one. And that way you can track them from one to the next, till finally when you get to your 100% IGA and all of these boxes are green and not red anymore, you know you've got it done. Your owner's rep can be a huge help in getting this done for you because this is a fair amount of work. Just like when you have, you know, meeting minutes being done by a contractor, it's hard to keep that making sense over a long period of time. This is a great way to do it. All right.
Chris, let's pause here and see if there's any immediate questions after that introduction. We'll have a couple of breaks like this during the presentation in case anything has come up that folks would like to have addressed now. Please, you can raise your hand, unmute yourself, drop it in the chat, whatever's easiest. Give it a second, and if there's nothing immediately, we'll jump into the next section. And one thing to keep in mind too is one of the support tools and services that's available as a campaign partner is that the Energy Services Coalition and Chris primarily will be providing office hours. So that is a scheduled time where you can sort of dive into issues individually that you may be facing. You might have questions about some of the information that's being presented here on kind of the best practice side, or again, you might have a specific situation where you're looking for assistance, and we are able to support that. So there's a mechanism for scheduling that time, and that's an opportunity as well. So it looks like in the chat, can you see that, Chris?
No.
Okay, so I'm just so Rod. Yeah, so that's okay. So Rod from Colorado is just emphasizing that the flow chart's important to track the process. So yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. Thanks, Rod. Hope things are going well in Colorado for you. Okay, so we'll jump into that.
Thank you. Yep.
Okay, great. And so this last section we just went through, I would typically spend 2 to 3 hours going through that with my clients in the past, right? So there's a lot there, and I know hopefully you're not being like, oh my God, what did he just say, right? So again, we're always happy to go back and answer questions after the fact. So the actual review steps, right? Now we're kind of set up. Here's how we're going to do this. We have the team set up. We're kind of have expectations created. It's not going to be a big surprise, right? I mean, don't drop we used to say, big binder on somebody's desk. Now it's, an email with a 20 megabyte attachment. Don't drop that on somebody on your staff without prep, right? And again, we didn't even have time to get into how you prep people for reviewing these, but that's something we can answer later on. But basically, this 6-step process is, verifying scope and methodology, analyze the baseline information, right? That is the key to all of this. And evaluating the ECMs, the ESCO comes up with, and you'll find sometimes that your own folks in-house already have a lot of these ideas. It's a matter of getting somebody with the expertise and time to go through and really evaluate these in detail. So it's super helpful to have them work together really closely with your ESCO. And scrutinizing the savings projections. And there's a bunch of different things we'll go through with that. Examining the M&V plan. That's the next big, huge key, right? Baseline and M&V are the two most important keys to a successful performance contract. And review the financial analysis for cost reasonableness. So if we really review all of these thoroughly, you can make sure this project is not only technically sound, but financially viable, right? And it's likely to hit the targets that you were hoping for, right? And again, I worked in probably 200 of these over the years, $2.5 billion worth of this kind of stuff from, the feds down to four building school districts. And we never had a savings shortfall in any of those projects, except for one, and it was a vendor ESCO issue and had nothing to do with the town or the ESCO. So it shows that this sort of methodology works. And it's really helpful to have people in the room to help you who have a background with this, right? Again, when I was doing this for an ESCO in the 90s, I really wish we had folks that could have helped these owners through this, right? Because it just wasn't a mature industry yet, and there weren't owners reps out there doing this sort of thing. So, first step, verifying the scope and methodology. The first thing is really like you would do in any contract, right? You want to see, what did they agree to? What did we agree to? Did everybody follow what they were supposed to do, right? Did the ESCO go through and go evaluate the facilities, systems, ECMs, and all that, as were on the list that you all agreed to in the IGA agreements? And we have a few slides about that in particular. Did they follow guidance on the maximum contract term? Did you say 15 years and they come back with a project that's in a 15-year cash flow, right? And that could change over time. Did they follow your input on funding streams, right? Do you have capital appropriations or not, right? Did you get BIL money or EECBG, right? Money from your state energy office? Are you looking at getting Inflation Reduction Act money, so on and so forth? And then the cash flow statements. Did they really follow everything you talked about at the beginning? Same thing with the timeline. Usually when you're working at the IGA agreement, an attachment to that is the schedule for developing the investment grade audit. And that's going to be the 30, 60, 90, and final. That includes, how many weeks or months it's going to take, and then a segment for the review time, right? That's key. You don't want to let the ESCO leave out the review time, because that works well for both of you. And then finally, did it comply with the risk responsibility matrix, which again, we talked about in the past two trainings that we did. Secondly, did the methodology agree with industry standards? And sort of the industry standard these days is this ASHRAE Level 3 audit methodology. And again, this is a live link in here. Let me get it over here on the screen. This goes to a handbook that you can, if you're really interested in this, is a handbook. You want to make sure your owner's rep and the ESCO folks have probably read this handbook on doing it the right way. And lastly, does the executive summary have a good high-level idea of the IGA process? What do they actually do to get to where they are and what the findings are? So that you don't want to have to dig to be able to find, how much is this going to cost me and how much is it going to save? Especially, for those of you that are at higher level in your organization, you're not going to read a 250, 300-page document, right? You're going to get 10, 15 pages in, so you have enough to know that this is working for you or not, because you have to be able to sell it to your external and internal stakeholders. So the first piece here, did they follow the audit scope and report requirements, especially the facility systems and the measures you all thought you might be working on? And so here's one from this actual audit that I was talking about earlier. And they basically, listed all the buildings that were agreed to early on, check, right? It makes sense for everybody. You typically want to make sure they're going to go through and do a detailed description of the existing conditions of these buildings and how they're operating now, right? And that's key, right? You need to make sure they understand how those buildings are operating. And again, this is an example I talked about earlier, who you want to review this: facilities manager, ops folks, owner's rep, and leadership folks, just to get a high-level view of like, oh, the high school, yeah, that looks familiar to how we operate the high school. The next thing that they're going to have is an ECM matrix, and this is honestly one of the best ones I've seen out there. It shows not only the list of measures that they looked at, right, by building in a matrix, which is good from a visual point of view. Otherwise, this would have been pages and pages of information. It shows you what they looked at and included, and what they looked at and didn't include, right? And this ties in really closely with the comment response resolution document, because what will have happened is all these ones with the O's on them will have been recorded that, we're dropping this measure, this boiler system optimization measure from these few buildings, right? And again, that's key. So there's no surprises at the end. Then the risk responsibility matrix we talked about a few minutes ago. Again, I went through this in a lot of detail in the last training, but this is basically a way to write down in plain English who is responsible for what regarding financial, operational, and performance requirements of this contract. And this is something that while the ESCO is developing the investment grade audit with your input, these sections are going to get filled out as you get further and further down. So when you get to the 90%, you have one of these, everyone looks at it, it makes sense, that gets put into the agreement, right? And this is how it looks like in its raw form. So the next thing is the energy audit, right? And again, we're not going to read all this, but this is good for you to look at after the fact. So this is basically a summary of what's included in an ASHRAE Level 3 audit. One of the things that really distinguishes this between like a Level 1 is what I call sort of a walkthrough, a drive-by or a walkthrough audit. That's high level, let's have an idea, sort of a pre-qualification assessment, right? And sometimes owners reps will do that for you to make sure there's some there before you go through the whole procurement process of hiring an ESCO. The Level 3 is really a lot of data collection. This is everything from collecting utility bills and so on, but also going out into buildings and actually measuring things, right? Putting loggers on and this and that to see when the lights are on and nobody's home, for example. Doing energy modeling, and this is everything from Excel-based spreadsheets of like lighting line by lines to very detailed DO2 energy models that do 87, 60-hour models of how everything works in buildings. Then a financial analysis where they're basically building up all the costs to do a measure and then seeing how that's going to be paid for over time, including all of the ongoing costs. The engineering analysis is really detailed, comprehensive engineering of how the building systems work now, how they will work when you improve them or replace them. And that includes everything from HVAC, lighting, and building envelope. And these days, solar, battery storage. We're seeing solar and battery storage becoming much more commonplace because now the prices have come down low enough that it can actually be included in a performance contract. Like, I don't believe PPA should ever be done again, right? You should just run all of them through your performance contracts. Then a lot of sub-metering and monitoring I mentioned. And finally, detailed recommendations based on all of the information that's been collected, all the analysis that's been done. Here's what they think you should be doing in your buildings. And you go through that with them and work out all the details to make sure how's this going to get operated, maintained, repaired, replaced, and so on between the two different parties. And all of that then goes into the agreement, including the risk assessment, right? We talked about that. It's very, very important to include that as part of contract and the audit. And finally, putting all of this together in a nice big red bow. So at the end, you have a really good high quality investment grade audit and proposal that includes all of the details that are going to get worked into the contract that you're then going to sign once this IGA is approved. And honestly, what you're going to be able to get financing from banks and other specialty lenders, right? That's why it's called investment grade audit. It is truly something banks will look at, and they sometimes hire outside consultants. I did this for Bank of America and a few other banks in the past, looking at measurement verification plans, for example. So the ECM summary table is sort of an outgrowth of that ECM matrix we talked about, where they're taking by measure what's the sort of the ESCO's cost. In this case, they put the owner's rep cost in there, total cost, the rebates, incentives, total savings, both energy savings and O&M savings, and then the payback. And a lot of people would look at this and go, oh my God, 33 years. Oh, that's horrible. Well, some of these things are not for saving energy. Usually you're replacing a boiler because it's on its last legs and it's the summertime, right? And you don't want it failing in the winter. You would have replaced it anyway with no payback to it. If you had to do it in the winter, it would cost twice as much, right? So planning it in here, doing capital renewal in a planned, thoughtful way is one of the absolute beauties of performance contracting. And by bundling these high payback measures with low payback measures like lighting, or commissioning, building envelope, you get a project that can pay for itself through savings instead of getting emergency money and so on, and taking capital that could be spent elsewhere. And listing the rebates, especially these days, it used to be just sort of utility rebates we would think about, and you get 10 or 20% paid for by a utility. These days, it's 50% in some cases paid for between the federal money coming out through state energy offices and the Inflation Reduction Act money coming out to the IRS. That has a huge impact on these deals. So the baseline information I mentioned before, most people think baselines is just how much did we spend on energy. That's part of it, right? That's sort of the data side, but the operational part is just as important, right? They need to reflect, and your folks need to all understand how are we operating our buildings, because there may be one person that's been there 40 years that really understands how the big high school has been run, right? For example, or the laboratory and so on. So you want to make sure that everyone gets on the same page with how things are being operated and maintained. So you figure out what the baseline is to then optimize them against. And the utility data we talked about already. Want to make sure that this stuff is accurate and complete. Really working closely together with the ESCO to make sure you're getting stuff directly from the utilities or directly from you. So if you use Energy Cap or something like that, you can send the information over to them directly. And a lot of this operational info talks about what's going on in these buildings, how are they used, when are they open, when are they closed, so on and so forth. And this I picked out the data collection plan. It's a good summary of here's how we put together all the utility data and how we're reflecting it in the audit. So the next thing is putting this all together into presentation that everyone can understand, right? In this case, they did a good job of summarizing by building how much energy is being used, how much it's costing, and separating out kW and kilowatt hours, right? And that's a best practice. I've seen done in the past, just blending it all and saying, oh, it's so many cents per kilowatt hour. Because that's not how savings are calculated. They're calculated on the marginal cost, not the average blended cost, right? These end-use breakdowns you see in the bottom left-hand corner are a great way to sort of target things, because if they look at this and go, wow, 40% of our energy use is in lighting, another 30% is in HVAC, that's where we need to be spending our time, right? It makes a great aid in targeting your approach. And having comparative metrics like this comparison on the right-hand side here, that's using the DOE CBEX platform to basically compare how your buildings compare to peers in that region or in that weather area. And it's super helpful to see how your buildings are doing. And something that sort of goes unseen is water treatment and wastewater treatment plants. And this one, right, just high school, middle school, or, they use the most. Anyone would expect that. Everybody's been to these buildings, right? Your kids go to school there, you go to Cub Scout meetings, whatever, but no one goes to the wastewater treatment plant, and that uses the second or third most energy in any town. So then actually reviewing the ECMs, right? So what you want to do is look at technical feasibility and appropriateness. What I tell a lot of my clients is that for public agencies, you want to focus on leading edge technologies, not bleeding edge technologies. That's what Google and Facebook and Apple do. Right? Let them figure it all out. And when you're running a government facility, you don't really want that. But make sure they're going to work for your facilities. You want to look at, did the ESCO get bids for a lot of the stuff? They act as a general contractor, and they're typically going to be getting bids from lighting contractors, mechanical contractors, electrical controls, so on and so forth. And again, this is another place where your OR can really help in reviewing these ECMs, because this is what they do day in, day out. And looking at costs, again, you've got your own staff who typically are, they're buying things all day, every day, right? The procurement people can be helpful in making sure that the costs and savings are accurate and reasonable. And there's this guide I've been using for almost 40 years, RS means Cost Estimating Guide, and that's a live link for that as well. It's super helpful, and they actually came out with a green building one recently. So you look through these, I've got these two snapshots of a couple of measures to kind of give you an idea of here's what they're recommending, and this is like, a few paragraphs after a few page or out of a few page description, which is pretty much what you expect for each of these. Next, you're going to scrutinize the savings projections rather. You want to verify that these calcs are based on sound engineering principles, right? They're following sort of what like ASHRAE is recommending. Is there somebody had a question? Okay. And making sure things are reasonable, including escalation rates. This is something you may have heard of, like solar PPAs, that they're putting in 5 and 7% escalation rates, and it's making these things unrealistic, right? There's something you want to make sure is reasonable among all the parties. You want to be able to trace these things so that they go from the back to the front of the proposal. And you want to make sure all of the individual commodities are taken into account, right? Like sewer, a lot of wastewater and sewer rates can be used to save a ton of money. And if there's any excess savings, that doesn't get split or anything like that or go to the ESCO, that goes to you, right? I like to say there's no rollover minutes in performance contracting. So the projections themselves, right? So what they should typically be providing and how you're going to review these is look to see summaries sort of by measure, right? How much is this lighting in this one example I pulled out? How much is it saving in total, both energy and dollar-wise? And then how do they actually calculate all this, right? And I'm taking this from what we call a line by line, which is literally a line by line summary of every room basically in all of your buildings. They show what's in there now, how many fixtures, what type, how many burn hours, so on and so forth. And in this case, on this first line, just that copy room uses $180 a year in energy, right? They're recommending replacing those 8 fixtures with 8 new LEDs that are going to use $83 a year, right? So that's about a 45% savings. So that makes sense, right? Going from fluorescent tubes to LEDs saves about half the energy, right? Just, rule of thumb. So you want to make sure this stuff is all done with real, actual formulas, not hard enters numbers, and not PDFs. That's the only way to trace it throughout. The next thing is the measurement verification plan. Again, one of the biggest keys to all of this, and again, I went through this in a lot of detail in the last training session, but basically IPMVP creates sort of the gospel we consider for measurement verification, and that's a live link where you can go to the handbook for this. There's 4 different options they provide, everything from discrete measurements, option A and B, and then C and D is really more modeling and linear regression analysis as well. And depending on the complexity of the measure, the cost typically goes upward. That's the different dollar signs, sort of like Yelp reviews, right? And you can see the different measures that are typically done that way. This is an example I used the last time as well, and this basically gives you an idea of, this big yellow box is sort of the systems now. Like we just talked about, say, fluorescent fixtures in a room with no occupancy sensor. You put in T8s, right? You move that bar down in the KW on the side. You put in occupancy sensors, and you move the bar to the left because you're reducing the operating hours. I'd like to think of this as an analogy that most people can understand is like a kilowatt acts as like a miles per gallon. It's the intensity of the energy use. Kilowatt hours of total energy consumption is sort of like the gallons of energy used, right? So you're going from like an Escalade to a Toyota Corolla hybrid when you do both of these sort of things. And that's how M&V gets measured over time. So lastly is the costs, right? You've figured out, yep, this all makes sense from a technical point of view. We've looked at the savings. Now how much is this all going to cost, and does this make sense for me, right? And as I said before, this is going to get built up over time, right? So you get, really high-level numbers in the 30 and 60. The 90% is much more detailed. And then finally, you're going to make sure that any of your input from the 90% gets reflected in the final audit, including open book calculations with complete transparency, right? You have to know how much a subcontractor's costs are and what their costs are that are being added to it. And I have an example right after this. You want to look at the financial projections, including the cash flow and return on investment. And you can have your ESCO do this in a, present value, whichever way your folks like to see it. And if you have a financial advisor and a lender, how they like to see it, so that it makes sense for them when you're going to sign your financial contract. And it needs to include all costs, not just, what's sort of my mortgage payment on this over time for the capital, but how much is it going to cost to do ongoing maintenance? How much is the measurement verification going to be, right? They do these annual reports to make sure that the savings are still there. That costs money. It's only maybe $20,000, $30,000, but it costs money. It needs to be in the cash flow. And again, this is an absolute ideal place to use your owner's rep and your O&M staff's experience in making sure this stuff makes sense from a cost point of view. So here's an example. This is one from a project where I blended results from about 7 different ESCOs on a project I reviewed last year. This is where you want to be able to see what are the subcontractor costs. That's the hard costs. Then how does it cost? How much does it cost rather for project development? That's your IGA, design engineering, project management permits, and so on and so forth. And these all add up. In this case, to 21%. That's their fees. Right? And typically the overhead and profit are put on top of that. So there's a few keys to this, right? You want to make sure that if they're including engineering time above, it should not be already fully burdened, right? If that already has overhead and markup on it, you want to make sure that doesn't get marked up twice, right? And I've seen that happen mainly by accident on a handful of occasions, and that gets to be the total cost of the project. So what I've done here is I've added up their fees and the markups, and it turns out to be about 36%, which is about what we see in the market It's a very fair and reasonable price for the aggravation that it removes from you having to do this through design, bid, build. It's worth every single penny. So secondly, the cash flow analysis, right? And this is a real eye chart. We're not going to go through the numbers, but this is basically a way of showing the total project value, the utility rebates, if there's any contingency, the OR fees, and sometimes we put like outside legal fees, cost of finance fees, all of that to see how much you actually are going to borrow, right? And then how much is it going to cost to pay that loan back over the term of the contract, right? In this case, it was a 20-year term. Shows escalation rates, retainage rates. It's going to show when the construction starts and when it ends, right? And when payments are going to start and when payments are going to end. Just like you would do with the mortgage or signing a PPA. You want to make sure all of these things are accurate and reasonable, and it is what you agree to in previous meetings. Okay, that was a whole lot of information. I know that. We have any more questions, comments?
Yeah, Chris, we'll let you catch your breath here, and this is we'll provide a few minutes here for any kind of immediate comments or questions that have come up, and then we're going to move into kind of our conclusion and talk about best practices and resources. So let's see. The question we have here, Chris, is what is the typical cost for the owner's rep?
So the owner's rep costs, I've seen anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4% of the project cost, and that's full, comprehensive, from helping you do an ESCO RFP and educating your stakeholders, all the way through IGA, audit, the agreements, negotiation and execution, implementation, measurement verification, commissioning, project acceptance, and the first year of annual M&V report review. And that typically includes all of that for that fee. And I'm actually putting together documents for Lawrence Berkeley Lab. They're just about finished, are going to be distributed through Department of Energy through this group that talks about that. And there's a few things we can go through on how you hire an owner's rep. We're going to do a whole another training on that. I think it's good if you're thinking about total price. It ends up being an absolute fraction of what you're paying for, and just the things that they save you in negotiating, helping you negotiate with an ESCO. I've typically, when I was doing this full time, I saved my clients 5 to 10 times my fee just in, finding mistakes or helping negotiate things and so on. So it's really worthwhile. But that's sort of the general range, and it's fee for service. So you get nothing for free. Another big one, a lot of firms will offer it, we'll do all this for free. We'll take our payment on the back end. That's a big conflict of interest, right? Just like, you're not going to hire an architect for free because he's going to pump up the cost of the building, right, to maximize the fee. It makes sense. It's business. So you don't want to do that with your owner's rep either.
So can I just follow up on that? That was my question.
Yes.
And it's
sure.
1 to 3 or 4% of the total value of the construction work?
Correct.
Not including
Correct.
fee of the ESCO.
So the construction work includes the ESCO's
Okay.
fees.
Okay.
So that slide here.
Yep.
This one, right? So you get back down here. Their total cost is 36%. When I went into the ECM summary table up here, these fees, right? So it's a $15 million project, $500,000 in
Fees.
OR fee, right?
Okay.
And that gets, I don't often see it broken down like this. The city must have wanted it done that way. It's typically based on the whole project, because if you drop one of these ECMs, right, that fee doesn't necessarily go away in whole, right? The same thing with ESCO fees. There's still overhead costs that go through the whole deal no matter what, even if you drop one of the measures, right? So that's pretty much how it works. And it varies again from place to place. But and if you want to talk about that anymore, please.
No, that's good. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, great.
And Chris, in the chat, what you may not be able to see is just some conversation. So Jason points out that they had an OR quote 1%. Laura asking, was that for the full project through M&V? yes, from day one to year one of M&V. So there's one example. Rod points out that on the final scope, don't feel that it's driven by the contractor. It absolutely is in the owner's decision side. So he points out that the final list is checked against the client's goals and what can be financed. So the client, the owner, should be driving the project.
Yep.
And then
that's what they do. Yep.
And then Beatrice, so once you have 100% IGA, can you make any additions to the ECMs? And when the agreement and when let's see, when did the agreement process begin? So yeah, once the IGA is done, any scope changes or additions after that.
Okay, so typically, right, you probably don't want to add more scope after the IGA is completed. And the other thing you led into was when the agreement is being executed, right? So typically, when you get your 60% IGA, is when you want to start the negotiations with the agreement or start running through the agreement, right? And we'll probably do a whole other workshop on this. Because you want to be able to understand what is this deal going to look like at the end of the road, right? And you want to be able to match the scope and the responsibilities and this and that with the technical scope that you're talking about as part of the development and the financial side of it. So you want to be able to get through that 90%, sort of figure out what the scope's going to be, make sure it's priced. So when you go out for financing, right, you have that price. Because once you go out for financing and you borrow your, in this case, say $15 million, and you sign the agreement and you get 3 months into construction and realize, oh, wow, we forgot this, or you know what, this just came out and this looks like a great deal for us. You can always modify the contract, right? You can add scope to the contract, and as long as you can add money to the contract, right? And you can typically go back to your financier, and it depends on how it was procured, right? Again, we don't have time to get into details of that, but they've gone to typically, patient investors on a 15 to 20-year term. That's like pension funds, right? Pension funds don't want to touch it, right? So there may be some supplemental financing that can be done to add, say, another $1 million on top of a $15 million deal. Right? But that's the key. And again, we don't have time to go into the details. We can go into this in an office hours thing. But working with the ESCO, on the same side of the table is critical to this, to make sure you get all the scope that makes sense for you at once. Right? Well, another thing I've seen done is, I'm working on a project here in Las Vegas with the school district. They have 400 schools. They're not doing this at once. We're taking chunks, right, and chunking it up so it's manageable to be able to get done. And that way you can go, okay, phase 2, we're going to do these schools, or phase 2, we're going to handle the HVAC or the solar or whatever the case may be. Did that answer the question or be helpful?
Yeah, I think
Yes.
I think that's responsive.
Yes, thank you so much.
One other question, Chris, before we move into the best practices section. So what are the typical financiers, the entities that are providing the financing for the projects?
So there's a whole array of them. There is some of your bigger banks. I mentioned Bank of America is big into public financing of this sort, right? PNC Bank does a lot of this. US Bank, out here, Wells Fargo, Bank of the West. There's a lot of specialty lenders out there. Hannon Armstrong is the largest lender in this whole business. Bostonia Capital, Peter Flynn, who's going to be speaking at the ESC and NASCO annual meeting in a few weeks. Then there's a lot of regional players that lend into this, even, community banks, regional banks lend into this. I think it's taken them a while to figure out that, boy, because of the technical precision that gets put into one of these versus, some bondable project on 5 new schools and it's change ordered to death, right? There's 10% extra cost because there's architects and engineers and contractors fighting. That doesn't happen with this. There's no change orders in performance contracting, right? Unless you do what was just asked. If you decided you want to add scope as the owner, that's fine. But if the ESCO missed something during the IGA, it's on them. Like that lighting line by line, right? I've literally seen like a wing a floor of a wing of a hospital was missed during the IGA, but that's what they said they would do. That was the scope. They had to eat the $100,000 or so to put that in, right? I mean, it's a rarity, but that's how it happened. So there's a whole bunch of financiers out there. I'm trying to think of who. Don't think we have a list, but
yeah, Rod has added to the chat that Colorado has signed with TD Equipment Finance recently. So another
Okay.
option. Yeah.
Right. And some states do have a finance company or two under contract. You know, like I know when I used to do this up in New England, like state of Connecticut would have Bank of America, right? And then Massachusetts would have somebody else to be able to do that sort of thing.
Yeah. And Laura's added a link from the Better Buildings Initiative connecting with financial allies, so you can sort that list by EPC to at least get a good starting place of the types of financiers that are in the marketplace. Okay, Chris, why don't we move on with the next section? We'll have an opportunity after that for some more Q&A, so be thinking of those. And again, we'll run this workshop until 30 minutes past the top of the hour for folks that want to stick around and ask questions, but we'll begin wrapping up with this next section. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Deb. And great questions. This is awesome. This is what we wanted this to look like, right? Just me talking isn't going to teach you everything you want to know. Asking questions and getting them answered is where the learning really happens. I've been talking about best practices throughout this whole thing, right? Having done this, at least on the owner's rep side for almost 25 years now. I can't tell you how important this common response resolution document is, right? I mean, I started doing this for Department of Energy in 2003, U.S. Department of Energy, and what a godsend that was, because it allowed us to keep in one place the ability to track what had gone on, right? And again, sort of like, you know, meeting minutes and regular construction, but they get lost and they aren't always additive, right? You have to find all the different emails, and it's a nightmare. And there's even some, you know, construction softwares, Procore and all those that are out there, which are great if you're like a builder, but if you're an organization like, you know, state agency or a school district, that doesn't always work as well for you. So this common response resolution document helps not only track things, but it allows you to get this record. Like I said, I've literally been in like school board meetings where somebody in the audience is like, why don't we have solar on all of our buildings? You know, which, you know, makes sense. It's a great question, but in some cases it just doesn't work, right? And that way, that sort of thing has gotten worked through during the IGA development process, and it shows up as, you know, comment 75, that, you know, the high school and the water plant and the middle school were the only ones that really had a compelling case to put solar in, right? Or your places of refuge in that town. They're the ones you want solar, and they're the ones you want to have battery storage on, right? So that provides multiple benefits. So completeness, making sure that the order covers all the required elements, as I mentioned before. And again, one of the keys to making this happen is having a really good, solid IGA agreement, right? And again, we put this into the last training, where that basically explains how the IGA is going to get done, what all the different components are, what the expectations are, so that it makes it easy for everybody, right? The ESCOs that do this are very, very good at what they do. Most of them are super qualified, right? I've been working with them for years, and as long as you tell them what you're looking for, they want to fulfill your needs, right? They want this to go well, they want to make the fair profit, and they want to have a great case study and a great reference in you, right? So they are really incentivized to do a superior job. And because they have, you know, 15, 20 years of skin in the game, the contract sort of makes it so. That's one thing I love about this. When I started in my career 35 years ago, 40 years ago, it was all design, bid, build, and we could never hold these contractors to anything. It was so hard. And performance contracting has really changed that. So some compliance, and I didn't talk about that this much, but those of you like Rod, who's the Division of Architect in Colorado, and others on this call, you've got pretty significant state regulations around this kind of stuff. You need to make sure they comply with all of the regulations. Right? I've done this for 7 or 8 states, and we always had to make sure the process got customized to meet those regulations. You don't end up getting towards the end and somebody at the Board of Regents goes, oh, you didn't meet this one thing, and bang, you're at the back of the line now, another 3 months wait to get this done. Technical accuracy, again, it's key. Again, another reason to have an owner's rep who understands this. It's a very niche thing, right? You may have folks on your staff that have done some of this, most likely not all of it unless they came from industry. Risk assessment, you know, that this is, again, another one of these things that is a real differentiator with performance contracting. It allows you as a team to basically identify, evaluate, allocate, and then price the risk, right, into these deals. Again, this is what your owner's rep isn't just your math double checker, right? They're your risk mitigator, your risk manager in this deal. And at the end of the day, again, almost none of the deals I ever worked on had issues because we spent all the time working this stuff out at the beginning. And then the rest of it was easier because it was more follow-up. And then the savings and cost reasonableness, making sure these things are realistic. Like I said, the bleeding edge versus leading edge, and things that are achievable, right? You don't want to put something out there. We want all this done in 3 months, right? Like the school construction season. You put so much pressure on contractors and your own staff, it doesn't always get done as well as it could. So you got to make sure the technical side of this is realistic and achievable, as is the schedule. And are the ECM costs reasonable, right? And again, there's a lot of guides you can use for that, like this RS means I was talking about, and then your experience, your in-house folks who've been buying stuff for years, as well as owners' reps. And then timing. A lot of this has to do with timing. And especially these days, I tell clients and former clients that with the money that's coming out of the federal government now, if you've been thinking about doing a performance contract, now is the time to do it, because you're never going to get this level of supplemental funding again, right? I've been doing this since the Exxon overcharge money in the 80s, and I've never seen anything like this in my life, and we'll probably never see it again. So you want to work with all your stakeholders inside and outside, and your advisors and your team, to make sure that this stuff gets done in a timely basis. It's typically all together. These are 6 months to a year to get an IGA completed. It depends on complexity and number of buildings and so on, but it's typically in that time frame. So resources. Energy Services Coalition put together these podcasts a few years ago that are on the website, and it's 107 to 120, focused on the components of the investment grade audit model docs that I'd mentioned earlier. These, I think, are ready to go now. I think they're either about to be released or going to be released soon. Same thing with our owners rep ones.
And Chris, if I could just interject real quick. So
sure.
when these are hyperlinks that will be in the slides you'll get. So you can just click on the links and it'll take you right there.
Every one of these that you can see, these are all live links. Anything with the underline like this, there's always a live link. And again, I know that at the end of this, you're all going to go on to the rest of your day. You'll hopefully remember some of this, and you'll probably want to pass it to folks that you work with. And you won't have taken copious notes, right? You're busy listening, but you're going to get recording of this, and you'll have these live links to go and consult with after the fact, right? And this is something you want to talk to us about office hours. We'll talk about in a few minutes. This is a great thing to bring this with you, and let's go through these, and I can help you through them and how to use them. Again, this is the course I talked about earlier. This is super. If you want to really learn a lot about this, if you're going to be doing this for the next few years, this is worth every hour of your time. And if you're an engineer like me, you need to get training units to be able to keep your license. And then eProject Express, I'm a huge fan of this. This is, again, another blessing I wish I had 20 years ago, where it's a free online portal. You can upload every single bit of information from your contract into this. A lot of agencies, state agencies and others are requiring that in their contracts, that the ESCOs have to do this for them. So it's wonderful. Then it's a resource you have to be able to go and find the 30% IGA, the IGA agreement, whatever it is that was part of your contract. That's all uploaded somewhere safe. It's not sitting on Joe's computer who just retired and he took his laptop with him, right? That literally has happened to me. So you don't want to see that. Okay, and then the ESPC campaign. Again, this is the host of all of these great events that are going on that Laura's done a masterful job with, are here to help you throughout this process. We have these expert-led trainings, webinars, peer exchanges, this office hours. We have a separate slide about that next. And then we'd really like to get more partners into this. And then you get additional benefits being assigned partner. So please consider joining. You'll get a lot more benefit out of it. There's the expression of interest form here.
And I just added
Go ahead.
Chris, I just added a link in the chat for that as well, so people can access that right away.
Great. Excellent. Excellent. All right. Questions?
So, yeah, raise your hand or unmute yourself if you had a question. There is one here kind of on the timing related to the availability of grants and federal funding that you mentioned, Chris. So is there sensitivity to starting this process because of grants and rebates that will eventually be going away?
Yes. What I've been telling folks for the past 2 years, especially since BIL was November of 21, Inflation Reduction Act was September of 22, is that start your project now, right? Again, this is just me saying, it's not DOE's opinion, it's my opinion, but the sooner the better, because, you know, depending on what happens with the election, some of this might be going away, right? Or rules could change, right? I mean, this is the IRS is handing out the Inflation Reduction Act, right? We all know the IRS makes changes every single year to the tax code, right? For what, various different reasons, lobbying usually from interested parties. And so it depends on what's going on with the administration that's in charge at the time. So a lot of this money has not been spent. The Energy Efficiency and Community Block Grants, EECBG grants, that went out on a formula basis to every state and territory that's controlled by the United States, got millions of dollars each, some tens of millions of dollars, right? Some of the bigger states got tens of millions of dollars. Some got awarded to the 10 largest local governments, cities and towns and counties, and the rest was being given to state energy offices to put together programs and disseminate out to local governments and school districts and so on. So I would call your state energy office if you have one, and get in touch with them right away. Find out what's available and if they can provide any of this help. And actually, all of our trainings so far have talked about that sort of thing. And we had a separate training in, what was that, May or June, that talked specifically about this topic of the extra funding. And the Inflation Reduction Act funding, again, that's like 10-year money. We think it's going to be hard to unwind that based on how the Senate put it together. But I don't believe any of it, right? If it was me in your seat, I would get going on a project. And again, we want to do a separate office hours. We can talk about how to get one started. But it's absolutely, for me, again, I've been doing this, it'll be 40 years next year. I've never seen this amount of money available. And it's a very mature industry right now. And you have a lot of providers that are out there trying to get a lot done at the same time. So, and it's only going to get busier. Go ahead.
Yeah, if I could add something that, so this was at the ESC's Market Transformation Conference last year, the question came up, there's a disconnect between like the direct pay tax credits that public entities can now access, and there's a timing disconnect between when the project is initiated and when the benefit from those direct pay tax credits is realized. And the answer from a lender, it was Bank of America, who was there, said that the way they're structuring their loans is for a one-time penalty-free prepayment equal to the value of the tax credit. So there may be a 2-year delay or year-and-a-half delay until that direct pay benefit is realized. And so the mechanics of the financing side can be addressed that way. If there are grants, ECBG or others that have an expiration date, those can be woven into an ESPC project and maybe buy down the cost or expand the scope, depending on, when the expiration of that is. By design, an ESPC project stands on its own, but if there are additional dollars that can either contribute to buying down the cost of the project or maybe adding scope for something that doesn't have an inherent payback, then that can all be rolled together.
Yep. I brought up this cash flow statement again, just to show what Dub is talking about, right? This loan payments, those payments can be modified, right? This one shows 805 year one, 714 second year, and then they slowly increase, right, with escalation over time. This is what he's talking about. And one of these years, year one payment usually, sometimes it's a year zero payment if it happens before construction's completed. That's when you take your $1 million in ECBG money or your direct pay tax subsidy from the IRS and plunk it down with no penalty, right? And that is super helpful, because if you can do that in a structured, organized manner, then you don't have to borrow that extra $1 million, right? If the bank you're borrowing from allows you to put that in, that's that much less capital you're paying interest on, right? And I'm not a finance guy, right? I'm just an engineer. Definitely looks like you have a question.
Stephanie, you're muted. Yeah. There we go.
Thanks so much for all this information. My question, and I apologize, this is the first one of these I've attended, so I've got some background, but I'm learning a lot as I'm listening. So the cash flow analysis is prepared by the owner's rep or by the ESCO. So who's so well in all of these grants and understands all of this?
The ESCO.
Yes.
So that's typically the ESCO's responsibility.
Okay.
Is they should be sweating the details on putting together utility incentives. Like by you, it's National Grid, for example, has tons of money for this, right? And Eversource, right, has tons of money for this kind of stuff. And you've got Mass PERG, I forget what it was. I used to do a lot of work in Mass, but anyway.
Mass Clean Energy Center.
Mass Clean Energy Fund, right. So putting all of this stuff together, that's the ESCO's responsibility. And that's something that goes into the IGA agreement, right? It will be the ESCO's responsibility to determine the amount of savings, Now, they won't always guarantee those rebates, right? That's a big issue in the industry, as you can imagine, right? Like with Eversource and National Grid, you go across a program year, those incentives can go away, right? If you start it now in October, by the time construction happens in June, they may have completely taken away all incentives for LEDs, right? That's what's going on right now in the business. LED incentives are going away because it's what everyone does, right? So that's important. That's super important. The good thing is then you have your owner's rep check that, right? So and your finance folks check that. If you have an outside accountant, they can check that, right? They're the ones, really, the accounting firms need to be the ones that really understand the Inflation Reduction Act money, because it's coming from the IRS.
I'm just trying to understand this so that I can potentially talk to our chief financial officer to help them understand, because there's a resistance from past experience with ESCOs.
Yep. I have a lot of history with Massachusetts. I'm more than happy to help you.
Okay, that would be great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. And actually, we have a couple more slides at the end. There's one about this office hours with the link, and I'll show you that.
Yeah, Chris, why don't you move to that? There's one other question I'll read to you while you're getting there. So when you have a final IGA report and the project is finding the financing, could you explain how eProject Express contributes to performance phase of the project? So okay, so where does eProject Express come in? How does that add value?
Okay, great. It adds value throughout the whole chain of events, starting with the IGA development. When you start to get, and this is another thing we include in contracts. When I did this, I wrote guidelines for state of Nevada and Delaware and New Mexico, North Carolina. We included in all of those ESCO contracts, again, ESCO shall input all information into, in that case, it was eProject Builder before EPX came out. Now it's eProject Express. So that as soon as they start to get like your 90% IGA together, you can upload that into EPX, eProject Express. And then when you have your 100%, the completed final one everyone has agreed on, that gets uploaded into EPX. So then you have like you do with the comment response resolution documents, you're going to have a 30% tab, a 60%, 90%, 100% tab for each of those. That should all be uploaded into eProject Express. So you have a free, online, cloud-based repository of all this information. And I can't tell you, when I was helping LBL really get EPICs out on the road originally, actually Project Builder originally. And I couldn't even go through my own records from my company, Celtic Energy at the time. I couldn't find all the stuff that I needed. And I'd go and ask the ESCO, oh, that's in cold storage in a warehouse out in Springfield, right? Or the guy that used to have that quit, we can't find his computer. And you're like, oh my God. So putting all of this into this repository that's free and it's secure, you know, it's cyber protected, all this kind of stuff, helps you for what we're talking about now, but also when you get into construction. All the meeting minutes, all of that, all can be uploaded. The final agreement between all the parties, the shop drawings, the commissioning documents, M&V documents, the substantial and final completion certificates, and then the annual M&V reports. So it continues to provide value all the way through. And as people turn over inside organizations, right, you know, sometimes all that stuff gets lost. You know, I've seen it with my own, when I used to have my company, somebody would leave and we thought they saved it all on the common drive, and they didn't. It was all on their laptop, and we didn't know till after they left, you know. So there's value throughout the whole chain. And the way to really extract that value, and that's really what this whole workshop is about, is trying to extract the maximum value from one of these projects, is require it of the ESCO in the contract. And if you need any help, right, we can provide you the help. Lawrence Berkeley Lab will provide free assistance to folks to help them get questions answered.
And Laura has dropped the direct link to eProjects Express in the chat too, so you can take a look at it more there.
Okay, great.
And I've also,
All right.
for the folks that are still with us, added another poll. We're always trying to make these workshops and webinars better for you. So if you have an opportunity, please take a look at that and complete it as Chris is going over these final couple of slides that we wrap up.
Sure. All great questions, really great questions. The more the better. So we're having a peer exchange next week. That's by invitation only, unless you're a signed up partner, public sector partner, you're not able to attend that. We're holding another workshop in a few weeks, November 13th. Again, that's open to all public sector folks. That's going to be working with your internal stakeholders to ensure a successful ESPC project. This is getting, you know, the folks on your team who believe in it, the folks around the fence, and the folks who are sitting there like this going, oh, this never worked. I did one 15 years ago, right? Working with them to help make a successful project. And then there's a webinar that's open to anybody, November 20th, the benefits of ESPC for finance and leadership. And this is really, you know, your CFOs, your treasury folks, director of public works, you know, mayor, city council, you know, anybody that's in a leadership position is, you know, this is a lot of technical minutia for people in that sort of a position. So how do we translate the benefits that you can see by getting that new boiler in so you don't freeze over the winter? How do you turn that into something that they're going to get behind, because they're the ones signing the contracts and getting the money? And then we have another training December 5th, going to be paying for your project, sort of like what we were just talking about with that other question, how you deal with financials, financing options, and the leveraging effect of ESPC and contributed funds. And this is, again, putting in capital appropriations, BIL money, and Inflation Reduction Act money. And we're going to have some guest speakers that are come from finance and inside, hopefully, organizations and their finance folks. And then lastly, there's this one, the ECBG program has cohorts that you can join to be invited to their trainings. And that's what this forum is for here. Then office hours, I've been talking about the whole time. This is basically to take, you know, questions like that we're answering here, and we can spend a half hour, an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is, to answer any question you have, no matter where you are. You've never heard of this before. You're thinking of doing one. You've done 10. You had good experiences, bad experiences. How can I get my state program going again? Anything. We want to really be able to help. And that way, you know, you're not in front of a bunch of people. There's just you and I, or there's a few other people that are doing this. Really talking about anything to help you make a difference, you know. And for me, you know, I'm trying to fight climate change absolutely as fast and furious as possible. And this is the best single tool I've seen in the marketplace. Listen, if you're involved in private industry, PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy, these two together are the two tools we have to get it done. And I think that is it. Oh, case studies. So if you've done some of these or one of these and you really liked how it went and you really want to show, here's a project that worked out really well for us, we're looking for case studies. We want to basically take, especially the partners who've already joined, sort of show that, you know, this is what you can do with these, you know, and I've seen amazing things done with these performance contracts. We helped a school 10 years ago that was able to replace their fire alarm system through a project like this. And, you know, it was amazing. So please, you know, think about sharing any case studies you might have. Again, we can talk about that separately. If you like, just contact us, but here's a submission form for it. And that is all I have, but we're more than happy to take more questions. Another 10, 12 minutes. I can tell Stephanie's dying to ask another question.
But you got Chris's email there, so you know how to find him, and yeah, that's a good entry point. We have Laura has also added to the chat case study collection form. So again, we're looking for good examples to share with others on how these projects have been initiated and how they've performed. So please help us there. Let's see, I'm looking to see. Oh yeah, here we go.
Okay.
One other question, yeah, from Stephanie. So question about PPAs. You mentioned why PPAs should not be used.
Yeah. And again, this is Chris's opinion. This is not the opinion of the U.S. Department of Energy, right? Like you hear in news reports. So power purchase agreements are basically buying electricity, right? Sometimes thermal, mainly electricity. Typically, public agencies do it, but a lot of corporations do this as well. So it allows you to buy the electricity by signing an agreement that says this third-party developer is going to put solar panels, you know, on your roof, on your carports in the parking lots, or a big array out in the field, like they did in Massachusetts and all the easements along the Mass Pike, right? And many other states have started to do this. But with PPAs, you don't own anything, right? You can't even point to your roof to impress your neighbors and, you know, look at my new solar panels. They're not your solar panels. They're the developer's solar panels, right? You don't get any of the renewable energy credits, the RECs. That all gets handed off to the developer. If there's things that are coming up like now, right, like there's BIL and all those other money, Inflation Reduction Act, they get to take all of those tax credits. You don't get any of that. And it used to be that, you know, solar was so expensive, maybe we wanted to make a statement, which is great. A lot of my university clients used to do this. But now you don't have to make it just to create impressions, right? You can actually afford, because the price of solar has come down by like 75% in the past 7, 8, 9 years, and it's continuing to decline. Then with batteries. Batteries are decreasing even faster than solar was, and solar still is. And for all the places in this country that are seeing absolutely catastrophic effects from climate change, this is key, right? So, you know, you could put this in. Those economics I was showing you from that other project, you know, it wasn't the greatest payback for the solar, but that was 2020 when that got priced, right? In 2021. Now they're probably 30 to 40% cheaper, right? So if you can include it in one of your projects, and either you pay cash for it or you go and get a loan from whatever bank, it's still basically yours. It's getting like, you know, mortgage on your house or a loan on your car. You kind of own it, right? And you get the benefits of it, including the tax credits, right? You're giving all of that away by doing a PPA. And you also have no idea how much profit they're making on you, right? What a lot of solar developers used to do is say, oh, you're paying 15 cents a kilowatt hour now. We're going to sell you it for 13 cents. Well, how about you show us how much the panels cost, the inverter, labor, everything, markup, profit. Okay. That comes out to like 9 cents a kilowatt hour. And this is literally, like, a lot of these solar companies used to make 50% margins. That's a highway robbery in my book. So I started counseling my clients years ago don't buy solar through a PPA unless we can help you do an open book PPA. And the developers weren't that keen on the open book PPA, right? So that's why. That's the main reason. Yeah.
And you've just confirmed my suspicions. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Any other questions?
No.
Okay, well, I guess we will wrap up for today then. Got our contact information. Be on the lookout for future workshops. Those that we have that we've done already are recorded, as are the slides. If you join up if you join as a partner at any level, you'll have access to this material. There's not a cost or anything like that. It's more of a commitment that you're interested in moving projects forward through ESPC. We'll report impacts, things like this. And that'll allow you access to these types of resources. So thanks to everyone. Yeah, great questions, great discussion today. We changed the format up a little bit to be more interactive, and I think that's helpful.
Yeah.
We learn as much from you in the questions you have as you probably learn from us. So excellent discussion today. So thanks for joining us, and we'll connect the next time.
Yep. Thank you all so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.